You're watching Twin Tiers Sunday with Renata Stiehl.
Hello and welcome to Twin Tiers Sunday. I'm Renata Stiehl with WENY TV News, and this week we're talking about a very important topic, bullying. It's a topic that we've been covering a lot in the news, both locally and on the national level, and it's a topic that's been getting a lot of attention in schools and in the media, online, different platforms. This week I'm joined by Professor Ritch Savin-Williams from Cornell University, human development professor.
Yes.
In the psychology area. He is also a national expert on bullying and is here to share some information and his expertise with us. So Professor Savin-Williams, thank you so much for coming on the show. But first I want to learn a little bit more about you and your background in this capacity.
Okay. So my specialty is in developmental and clinical psychology, and I did my PhD looking at adolescent youth groups and how they structure themselves in terms of dominance hierarchies. So throughout my career at Cornell, I've taught courses on adolescent development and done research, in particular with gay and lesbian bisexual youth, but always concerned with sort of social relationships and personality development.
Okay, and now as far as bullying goes, you've also done a number of public presentations about that, and you've been also used as a consultant and lend your expertise in a few different areas.
Yes, so whenever sort of the concern has been either in programs or doing research that looks at adolescent development and in terms of how they interact, so sometimes I am able to give some advice.
Okay, and that's what you're here to do today, is to lend your expertise. Now we hear so much about bullying, but it's kind of a vague term, I think. And you know, there's always childhood teasing and picking among kids, but at what point, I guess, do we apply the label bullying when the kid starts to feel intimidated or uncomfortable? It seems like there's not really a clear line here.
And this is perhaps the major problem, and the reason why a lot of programs are not very successful that attempt to stop bullying. So I think it's important to make a very important distinction here. There is what we call bullying behavior, and then there are people who are considered to be bullies and victims. So when you look at that difference, it's a very important one, in the sense that bullying, the behavior is a huge range of behaviors, all the way from not being invited to a party or feeling excluded for some reason, all the way to really quite violent physical interactions. So all of that is considered bullying, and yet there's a huge discrepancy between being knifed in the stomach versus being excluded from a party that you wanted to go to. So there's a wide range of behavior. I like to think of it not, in fact, I'm not real fond sometimes of the word bullying because it encompasses so much. So I think it's important to think of it as peer conflict. And clearly peer conflict has always been there, it will always be there, and there's no program on this universe that can stop peer conflict per se. It's just part of social interaction. So I think some of what we consider to be rather normal behavior among adolescents gets labeled as bullying, when in reality it feels to me it's the way that kids and adults and children interact. I think the deeper concern frequently are for those individuals who are considered or labeled bullies, who do this to an extreme amount, and of course the people who on the receiving side, victims. So when you ask young people, is there bullying in your school? Nearly 100% will say yes. But then when you ask, have you been bullied? Then only about 6% will say they are bullied on a fairly consistent daily basis. So yes, most kids have been bullied if we use that very broad definition. That is, someone has insulted them or threatened them or some way or the other caused some conflict.
And now when we're talking about these kids that kind of get that label as a bully, what is it in these kids that, especially in the ones that are more aggressive and perhaps more violent, how does it, you know, as a parent, you raise the kid and you think your kid is sweet and you want them to grow up to be a good person, But as we're learning, as they mature, whether that's 6, 7, 8 years old, or middle school or high school age, something changes and they become more aggressive, perhaps towards an individual or a group of individuals. What is happening in their psychological development that kind of leads them on that path?
Well, that sense of development is a very important one. As best we know, the bullies who are adolescents or early adolescents were also bullies as children. So they have a lifelong pattern of being abusers, being very assaulting of other kids. So in some sense, it's not all of a sudden they suddenly become bullies. There's a pattern there, there's a developmental history. And what we best know is that very likely their parents were bullies as well. So what seems to happen is that they have parents who have some of the same characteristics that instigate bullying. For example, being very extroverted, being impulsive, not being able to control your emotions. Those are the kinds of things that the parents of bullies also have. So what parents actually give their child who turns out to be a bully is not only their genetic code, so the same behaviors that you have impulsive parents producing impulsive youth, but they also create an environment because of their genetics and their characteristics that indeed enhance the possibility that their child will also become a bully, which is to me very important, because that says to me that sort of normal, typical school-based programs that focus on a very large umbrella of the term, bullying, will not likely have much impact on these kinds of young people, because what they need is a very targeted approach that addresses not only them as individuals, but also their family. So when you look at the families of these bullies, it looks really pretty horrific. In many cases, there's domestic violence, there's abuse, there's neglect, there's frequently physical violence on the part of parent against child. So it's not a very pleasant kind of environment that is a background for these bullies.
And now, as we've seen in the past several years, there's been some high-profile cases of bullying. One of the most recent ones, the Karen Klein, the Greece school bus monitor, who was videotaped being tormented and physically harassed by young kids on the bus. So we want to talk about some of those higher-profile cases, along with how Professor Savin-Williams mentioned some of these school programs aren't necessarily effective, and what parents can do when we come back for our next segment of Twin Tier Sunday.
Twin Tier Sunday will return in a moment.
I'm Renata Stiehl, and welcome back to Twin Tier Sunday. I'm talking with Professor Ritch Savin-Williams from Cornell University. We're talking about bullying, and the last segment we talked a lot about the psychology behind kids who become bullies, their home environment, their genetics, and how that can kind of contribute to that factor. And we also want to pay attention to some of the cases that have really thrust this topic into the national spotlight over the past couple of years, whether it was Tyler Clementi, the Rutgers student who ended up committing suicide. There's been a few other high-profile bullying-related suicides, Jamie Rodemeyer from the Buffalo area, Phoebe Prince from Massachusetts, and these are just some of the cases that have really gotten the nation's attention on this topic. And one of the most recent ones, fortunately not having ending up in such an extreme as a suicide case, but Karen Klein, the Greece school bus monitor, which is the Rochester area, being bullied on the school bus one of the last days of school. She's an elderly woman in her 60s, and a student was videotaping her being called horrible names, swore at, poked, prodded by kids on the school bus. And so it's not just kids targeting kids, some of these kids are also targeting adults, people that we've hopefully been brought up to respect.
Right. So when you talk with young people, they will say that they receive a lot of bullying from adults. In fact, if you were to ask some young people, they would say the biggest bully in school is a particular teacher or coach or principal or supervisor. So I think there's some real issues going on with adults and children and the way we treat children and youth in our culture. So I'm not surprised in some ways whenever they have an opportunity then to lash back, even on innocent victims. And I think what happens frequently is in our culture we have created a climate of bullying. And you look at our political situation right now where there's a lot of very clear bullying behavior, and it's not condemned but actually glorified. So I think we have a culture of bullying in which it feels okay, it's kind of fun. It's kind of what you do is to sort of jump on the bandwagon and become not a bystander, but actually actively involved in this kind of verbal harassment.
And as we've seen as this political campaign goes forward, these attack ads where we see claims and nastiness going back and forth. So I think you're exactly right on that level. And one thing that stuck out to me with the Karen Klein incident is that there's a school bus full of kids, and there's 3 or 4 who are kind of needling her and behaving this way, but there's a whole school bus full of children who are watching this, and they're not doing anything. And we see this in schools. Everybody seems to know someone who's bullied if they're not a target of it themselves. But when it comes to stepping up and saying, hey, leave him or her alone, stop doing that, there seems to be less of that and kind of, okay, this is happening, but it's not happening to me, so it's not affecting me.
Right. And it's sort of a controversy in the field about whether we should be teaching young people not to be bystanders and to get involved in that. On the other hand, is that the responsibility of young people, and do they put themselves in danger or not? So there's some uncertainty about what we do with children, what do we encourage them to do. And clearly some of the school programs do emphasize, don't just simply sit there, try to do something if you can. But of course always as long as you are safe. Are not sort of threatened in your own way with physical violence or assault in some ways. It's a difficult situation. I think in some ways what would be very surprising to parents is to actually see that their child is a bully. I think there's a way in which if you ask young people, they can pick out the bullies. They can give you the names. But then if you were to actually go to the parents and say, is your child a bully? Only about 10 or 11, 12, 15% of parents would acknowledge that their child is a bully. So there seems to be a real lack of communication between the children and the parents in regard to what happens at school. Whether the parents don't ask, they don't want to know what's happening on the school bus or in the schoolyard or in the classroom or hallways, or whether simply the young person just decides, I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to remain absolutely mum on this kind of issue.
Now, as a parent, whether you're willing to admit or acknowledge that your child is a bully, or if your child is one that's being the target of this, what can you do? Because I think at that age, a lot of kids don't really think beyond about how something affects them immediately, and they're not thinking about how it affects anybody else.
Right. Well, I would certainly encourage parents to talk with their young person, to talk with their son and daughter about what's going on in the school situation. What kind of harassment is there? How safe does the school feel? So I think that it's the conversation which is really important for the parent and the young person to have, so that the parent gets some sense of what's going on. And certainly if their child is a victim and being very much harassed and really threatened, then certainly the parent needs to address the school administration, because every school should be a safe environment for every child that goes to that school, regardless of what they look like or what their religion is or their sexual orientation is. They need to go to school in a very safe environment. Most parents just simply don't know. I don't know if they don't care or they don't bother to ask, but they need to step up and start having these conversations.
And now school districts or statewide school districts have taken initiatives to kind of combat bullying. In New York, we now have the Dignity for All Students Act, and many states have similar programs in place, which basically states that school is a place where you have the right to come, feel comfortable, get an education without pressure and bullying and attacks from others. But you're saying that many of these programs aren't necessarily effective.
Well, the problem is that, I mean, I like the school's program which says, you know, all students have a right to have a safe environment and those sorts of things. But I think when it comes to the most dangerous activity, I mean, they are assaults. And I think when we call them bullying, we somehow minimize them. Sometimes they are an actual crime, and they need to be treated that way. Some of these youth are enacting dangerous criminal activities, and they need to be addressed that way.
And then real quick, I want to touch on the social media aspect, because it now goes beyond what's happening in the school halls and parking lots. People are being targeted online with horrible things being said about them, pictures being posted about them. So that's just one other realm that we have to deal with in this day and age.
And we're not quite sure how to deal with that. I mean, how to cope with that. It certainly is a new way. Certainly it's the face-to-face, which is most problematic and most painful for most young people. But on the other hand, you know, what is the future of this kind of cyberbullying? And how do we stop it? How do we put you know, some restraint on that? That's going to be a real challenge for our culture as we move forward.
Yeah, no clear answer on that one yet.
Not yet.
Well, Professor Savin-Williams, I want to thank you for coming on the show and offering your insight into this important topic. And when we come back, we're going to learn about a local program that focuses on going into schools and tackling this problem and building self-esteem and trust among students. We're going to hear from them after the break. You're watching Twin Tier Sunday.
Twin Tier Sunday will return in a moment.
Welcome back to Twin Tier Sunday. I am now joined by two gentlemen from the Power of One MMA Gym and School. You may have seen it at the Arnett Mall here in Horseheads. Jason Porter and Jarod Cervoni, who are using the principles of mixed martial arts to help fight bullying in school districts. They've got a program called Pride, and we want to learn more about that. So Jason, first of all, tell me what Pride is, what it stands for, and where the idea came from.
Sure. Pride has been something that's been in development for the last 15 years. It is mixed martial arts based. Pride itself is an acronym for positivity, respect, integrity, discipline, and empathy. So we're really using mixed martial arts to get kids involved with our program and to talk about character awareness education, which includes bully awareness. We have a complete curriculum on bully awareness.
And now, Jarod, this is a pretty new program into schools, and I was talking with Professor Savin-Williams about how a lot of school-based programs aren't necessarily effective because they don't clearly address bullying, and perhaps they don't go far enough. But this is kind of a different approach. You're really getting hands-on with these kids. And what kind of kids are you reaching out to in the program?
Well, as far as what kids we're reaching out to, we do basically grades 2 up through 12th. We can basically do it in a setting within the school structure, or we can also do it as an after-school program, which tends to be more of a favorite at this point. And then basically what we can do is, up to the class setting, we can do up to 20 to 30 kids at a time. And at this point, we have about 150 different curriculums that we can go through, and we allow the schools to kind of handpick what they may feel their particular school may have some struggles in.
Mm-hmm. And now for the kids that are enrolled in this program, are these kids that would be perhaps traditionally labeled as bullies, or kids who are more aggressive, or kids who maybe are the target of bullying and maybe need a little help building their self-esteem, self-confidence, and perhaps teaching them to say no and stand up for themselves?
It really, I call them gray area. It's the kids that you see aren't really pulled into other activities. Exclusion, which is a part of bullying. So that's a big group that we focus on. Although any of the kids can benefit from it. Not all of them are what we call gray area kids, but they seem to have phenomenal results. The kids that aren't tied into other curricular, activities. So.
And now, as far as mixed martial arts is concerned, it's a very popular sport. Many would argue it's a very violent sport. Mm-hmm. So how are you using something that many people associate with an aggressive, violent thing, into using that into making it a positive thing in schools?
Again, mixed martial arts really gets the kids under what we call, gets them under the big top. Gets them interested. It is the fastest growing sport. So kids get in, they really get to learn the concepts behind mixed martial arts, but really that's tertiary to what we're trying to do. Again, we get them involved, and then we sit down and we do, it's getting kids to stop and think about how their actions, their body language, their tone of voice impacts others. That's where the empathy part comes in. We've never had a problem with kids going off and using this because we do stress the self-defense aspect. We also really focus on respect. So kids, when they have self-respect, they have respect for others. So that's where we start. We start building the kids' confidence, teaching them that they can respect themselves, treat their body in the right manner, both physically and mentally, emotionally. And once they start to have respect for themselves and confidence for themselves, they start to treat others with that same respect. And that's really the key, confidence. You know, kids who bully or the kids who are being bullied typically lack the confidence, you know. So, yeah, we're teaching kids to believe in themselves and to stay positive and pay it forward. You know.
A lot of mentoring skills and leadership skills, too.
Yeah.
So we're not teaching kids to fight each other and be aggressive and fight it out that way, like many people may mistakenly believe that mixed martial arts has a lot to do with.
Yeah.
But as far as the physical aspect of the program, what kind of activities, Jarod, are the kids doing?
Well, as far as that, you know, they're doing a little bit of pad work. We don't overwhelm the kids. It's going to be some basic self-defense techniques. We get the kids, get their endorphins going, get them to do some pad work. But ultimately, within that same workout, you know, we get them to sit down in what we refer to as coach's circle and really get these kids to start getting their minds thinking about whether it's, again, respect, self-discipline, teaching these kids empathy, and really start to, like I said, get their brains thinking of how their actions, how others are perceiving their actions, their body language.
And when we're thinking of kids and adolescents, most of them tend to have a very me kind of thought that, you know, they are the center of their own universe and not necessarily thinking about what they say and what they do, how that makes others feel.
Right.
And this is really targeting that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a big part of what we do is how to pay it forward. So how do I take what I've learned and teach my peers how to do it, or my siblings, you know? And we've had phenomenal results with that. Again, we've had kids that have gone from failing their classes to honor roll. I mean, it's just phenomenal results. Again, it's just getting kids to stop and think about their actions is a big part of it. So.
And now, as far as some of the, I guess, the personality transformation that they kind of go through for this program, one, you say you're getting them to become self-confident, you're getting them active, and you're getting them to think about their actions. Jarod, just talk a little bit about, you know, when one particular kid comes in on day one, and when you finish the program, what kind of difference can parents see in them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically, with one of the schools that we recently had, we had this kid that was having a lot of issues, definitely with self-confidence, had a lot of issues with, you know, tending to make fun of other kids. Literally about 3 to 4 weeks into this program, he's starting to take other kids under his wing, teaching them techniques, teaching them anywhere from actually gym class to where, you know, he's now picking the kid that normally wouldn't get picked first. And it's very special to see. It's seeing these kids start to walk around with their heads held high. And that's not the only case. I mean, literally, you can see a nice transition for every boy and girl that do the class.
And now for parents who are watching this show, and whether this has piqued their interest or they want to know, is this in my school district, or if it's not, how can I find out more information? Jason, where can they go to learn more about the Pride program?
Sure. All of the Power of One branches incorporate the Pride program in their youth classes, so that's one place they can find it. If their school district doesn't have it, they can find out more information at powerofonepride.com. And they can learn more and contact us to gain some information on how they can get that in their schools. But we are talking to local schools, but it's a process.
And now, what schools here in Chemung County are you in right now?
Odessa Montour, we've worked with Watkins Glen, Elmira Southside, Elmira Free Academy, a number, Bradford, Broadway.
Okay, so in a good number of schools
Yes,
at this
yeah,
point. The program
yeah.
seems to be kind of taking off and
Yes, it is.
becoming more popular. Well, Jason and Jarod, we've run out of time so quickly, but I want to thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming on the show and talking about the Pride program. And again, that information is there if you'd like to learn more about the program yourself. And we want to thank you for joining us for Twin Tier Sunday.